Sophia Martinez had perfected the art of being underestimated long before she ever stepped foot in Eagle Eye shooting range. At 29, she moved through Glamour and Grace Salon like any other stylist, scissors in hand, creating perfect layers and listening to endless gossip, while the locals at Cedar Valley's premier shooting range would soon learn that the quiet woman who cut their hair possessed skills that could silence even the most arrogant marksman with 15 shots that defied belief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Glamour and Grace Salon as Sophia arrived for another day of what everyone assumed was just cutting hair. At exactly 7:30 a.m., she unlocked the glass doors and flipped the sign from closed to open, beginning a routine that had become as precise as everything else in her life. Her movements were economical, purposeful, traits that most people attributed to simple professionalism, never imagining they were the result of years of military training where wasted motion could mean the difference between life and death. Deanna Foster, the salon owner, breezed in 20 minutes later with her usual whirlwind energy, coffee in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear as she finished what sounded like an argument with a supplier. Diana was a good woman, kind, fair, and completely oblivious to the fact that her most reliable employee had once been capable of eliminating targets at distances that would challenge Olympic athletes. "Morning, Sophia," Diana called out finally, ending her call with an exasperated sigh. "Mrs. Henderson is coming in at 9 for her usual trim and color. You know how particular she is about the highlights." Sophia nodded, already setting up her station with the same methodical precision she'd once used to prepare sniper equipment in mountains halfway around the world. Each tool had its place, each product positioned for maximum efficiency. To anyone watching, it looked like the habits of a meticulous hairdresser. In reality, it was muscle memory from years of operations where equipment failure or poor organization could cost lives. Megan Clark, the salon's other full-time stylist, arrived. In a rush as always, her blonde hair still damp from what was obviously a very quick shower. At 24, Megan had the kind of effortless beauty that made clients request her specifically, but she also had the attention span of a butterfly and the organizational skills of a tornado. "Sophia, you're a lifesaver," Megan said, grabbing supplies. From Sophia's perfectly organized station, "I'm totally out of the good conditioner, and my first client is Mrs. Patterson. You know how she gets if everything isn't perfect." Sophia handed over the conditioner without comment. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, and Megan's chronic disorganization was one of them. Besides, there was something almost endearing about the younger woman's chaotic approach to life. It reminded Sophia of what it might have been like to be carefree, to never worry about anything more serious than running out of hair products. Katie Walsh, the receptionist, completed their small team. She was efficient, friendly, and had an uncanny ability to remember every client's preferences, family details, and preferred appointment times. Katie treated Sophia with the casual familiarity of someone who'd worked alongside her for 2 years without ever suspecting that her quiet colleague had capabilities that extended far beyond creating the perfect bob cut. The morning proceeded with typical salon rhythm. Mrs. Henderson arrived precisely at 9, as she had every 6 weeks for the past 2 years. She was a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and opinions about everything, particularly the state of modern society and young people's work ethic. "Sophia, dear," Mrs. Henderson said as she settled into the salon chair, "I heard the most ridiculous thing yesterday. My grandson Tyler, you remember Tyler, just finished his basic training. Well, he was telling me about some shooting competition they're having over at that range on Maple Street. Apparently, some of the local men think they're quite the marksmen." Sophia's hands never paused in their work, sectioning Mrs. Henderson's hair with mathematical precision. But something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Eagle Eye Shooting Range," she said quietly. "I've heard of it. That's the one. Well, Tyler says there's this man, Brad Jackson, they call him Bull for obvious reasons, who's been bragging all over town about being the best shot in the county. Apparently, he's challenged anyone to try and beat him in some kind of contest they're planning." As Sophia began applying the color mixture, her movements remained steady, but her mind was processing information with the analytical precision that had once made her one of the military's most reliable assets. She'd heard about Brad Jackson around town, a loud, aggressive man who compensated for his insecurities by dominating every conversation and dismissing anyone he perceived as weak or irrelevant. "The arrogance of some people," Mrs. Henderson continued, warming to her subject. "Tyler says this Jackson fellow was making fun of women shooters, claiming none of them could hit the broad side of a barn. Can you imagine? As if being born male automatically makes someone superior with a rifle." Sophia's jaw tightened slightly, a reaction so subtle that even Mrs. Henderson, who prided herself on reading people, didn't notice. But Sophia remembered other men like Brad Jackson, soldiers who'd made similar assumptions about her capabilities, right up until the moment she'd proven them catastrophically wrong. Tyler wanted to defend women shooters, bless his heart, but he's just finished basic training. What does he know about real marksmanship? Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "I told him to stay out of it. No point in getting humiliated by some local bully just to make a point." The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. Here was Mrs. Henderson, whose hair she'd been styling for 2 years, completely unaware that the woman carefully applying highlights had once been capable of shots that would make Brad Bull Jackson's boasting look like amateur hour. But that was the point, wasn't it? She'd chosen this life specifically because it allowed her to disappear, to be seen as just another civilian working an ordinary job. Megan wandered over during a break between clients, curious about the conversation. "Are you talking about that shooting thing? Oh my God, my boyfriend Derek was there last weekend watching some of the practice rounds. He said this Bull guy is actually pretty good, but such a total jerk about it. Apparently, he was making jokes about how real shooting isn't for people who work in beauty salons or other soft jobs." Sophia's hands continued their precise work, but something cold settled in her stomach. She'd spent 2 years in Cedar Valley specifically to avoid this kind of situation, the moment when her two worlds might collide. She'd chosen hairdressing because it was as far from military life as she could imagine, a profession where precision meant creating the perfect cut, not eliminating threats at impossible distances. "The worst part," Megan continued, oblivious to the effect her words were having, "is that Derek says some of the other guys were agreeing with him. Like, automatically assuming that anyone who doesn't fit their idea of what a real shooter looks like must be incompetent." Mrs. Henderson made a disapproving sound. "Typical masculine nonsense. I've known plenty of women who could outshoot any man if given the chance. It's not about strength. It's about patience, precision, and attention to detail, qualities that some people seem to think are weaknesses." As Sophia rinsed out Mrs. Henderson's color and began the styling process, she found herself thinking about the conversation long after it should have faded into background noise. She'd worked so hard to build this quiet life, this identity as just another small-town hairdresser who minded her own business and avoided conflict. But there was something about Brad Jackson's attitude, his dismissive assumptions about people like her, that touched a nerve she thought she'd successfully buried. The rest of the morning passed in the usual routine of cuts, colors, and conversations about everything from local politics to celebrity gossip. But underneath the normalcy, Sophia was processing what she'd learned about the situation at Eagle Eye Shooting Range. A part of her, the part she'd tried so hard to suppress, was calculating distances, considering wind factors, remembering the weight of a precision rifle in her hands. During her lunch break, She found herself walking past Eagle Eye Shooting Range instead of heading to her usual sandwich shop. The facility was larger than she'd expected, with multiple outdoor ranges, and what appeared to be a substantial indoor complex. Through the fence, she could see several people practicing, their shots echoing across the valley with the sharp reports that had once been as familiar to her as breathing. A group of men stood around one of the shooting benches, and even from a distance she could identify the dynamics. The loud voice carrying across the range belonged to someone used to being the center of attention, while the others arranged themselves in the subtle hierarchy that always formed around dominant personalities. She didn't need to see faces to know she was looking at Brad Jackson and his admirers. As she watched, one of the men, younger, less confident, attempted a shot that apparently missed the target entirely. The laughter that followed was cruel rather than good-natured, the kind of mockery designed to reinforce someone's position in the social order rather than encourage improvement. Sophia turned away and walked back to the salon, but the image stayed with her. She recognized the type of environment, the kind of toxic masculinity that had made parts of her military service unnecessarily difficult. Men who equated loudness with competence, who assumed that anyone different from them must be inferior. Afternoon, Tyler Anderson, Mrs. Henderson's grandson, stopped by the salon to pick up his grandmother. He was exactly what Sophia had expected, young, eager, still carrying himself with the slightly rigid posture of someone fresh from basic training. His grandmother introduced them with obvious pride. "Tyler, this is Sophia, the wonderful young woman I've been telling you about. Sophia, this is my grandson, just finished his Army basic training." Tyler shook her hand with the firm grip they'd taught him in training, his eyes carrying the mixture of confidence and uncertainty that marked new soldiers. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. Grandma says you do amazing work." "Congratulations on finishing basic," Sophia replied. "What's your MOS?" Tyler blinked in surprise. Most civilians didn't know military terminology. 19 Delta, ma'am. Cavalry Scout." Sophia nodded. "Good field. You'll learn a lot about observation and reconnaissance." The young soldier's expression shifted to curiosity, but before he could ask how a hairdresser knew about military occupational specialties, Mrs. Henderson was bustling him toward the door, chattering about dinner plans and family obligations. Not as they left, Sophia caught Tyler looking back at her with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She'd made a mistake, revealed knowledge that didn't fit her cover identity. It was the kind of slip that had to be avoided if she wanted to maintain the careful separation between her past and present lives. But as the day ended and she closed the salon, Sophia found herself thinking not about maintaining her cover, but about Tyler's eagerness to defend women shooters despite his inexperience, about Mrs. Henderson's frustration with masculine arrogance, about the cruel laughter she'd heard from Eagle Eye Shooting Range. Some problems, she reflected as she locked the salon doors, had a way of finding you no matter how hard you tried to avoid them. And sometimes, the skills you thought you'd left behind turned out to be exactly what the situation required. The question was whether she was ready to pick up that part of herself again, or whether she'd continue being just the hairdresser that everyone assumed she was. What nobody at Glamour Grace Salon knew, what Tyler Anderson had almost stumbled upon with his curious glance, and what Brad Bull Jackson would soon discover to his eternal regret, was that Sophia Martinez had once been Staff Sergeant Sophia Martinez, United States Army Special Operations Command. For 6 years, she had been one of only 12 women to qualify for the Army's most elite precision shooting program, a classification so secret that even her discharge papers listed her simply as Infantry Support Specialist. The transition from military life to civilian hairdressing hadn't been random or accidental. It had been carefully calculated, like everything else Sophia did. After her final deployment ended with a medical discharge following an IED explosion that left her with chronic back pain and nightmares that still woke her at 3 a.m., She'd needed something as far from her previous life as possible. Something quiet, peaceful, where the most dangerous tool was a pair of scissors, and the biggest crisis was running out of her preferred hair color. But muscle memory was a stubborn thing. Every morning when she arranged her tools at the salon, her hands moved with the same methodical precision she'd once used to assemble and maintain a Barrett M821 sniper rifle. When she calculated angles for layered cuts, part of her brain was still computing wind speed, humidity, and target movement. When clients sat in her chair and relaxed under her skilled hands, they had no idea they were being served by someone who had once been capable of eliminating threats at distances exceeding 1,200 meters. The Army had discovered her talent almost by accident during basic training. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 300 meters with standard rifles, Sophia had been placing shots in groups so tight the range instructors initially suspected equipment malfunction. Further testing had revealed natural abilities that occurred in less than 1% of the population. Exceptional hand-eye coordination, the ability to control breathing and heart rate under stress, and most importantly, the mental discipline to remain absolutely calm while making calculations that required both scientific precision and split-second timing. Her specialty had been what the military euphemistically called high-value target elimination, removing enemy snipers, commanders, and bomb makers who threatened American forces. In 6 years of deployment across 3 different theaters, she had recorded 67 confirmed eliminations, each one a surgical strike that had saved countless lives by removing threats that conventional forces couldn't reach. The work had taken its toll in ways that went beyond the physical. Each successful mission had required her to study her targets for days or sometimes weeks, learning their patterns, their routines, their human habits. She'd eliminated a Taliban commander who played with his young daughter every evening before conducting operations that killed American soldiers. She'd removed an insurgent bomb maker who fed stray cats outside his workshop while designing devices meant to maim and kill. The cognitive dissonance of seeing enemies as complete human beings before ending their lives had gradually worn away parts of her soul she hadn't known existed. The end had come during her final deployment in Afghanistan. An IED had destroyed her unit's convoy, killing 3 soldiers and leaving Sophia with a compressed spine and traumatic brain injury that ended her military career. But the real damage had been psychological. She'd spent 6 months in military hospitals, undergoing surgery and rehabilitation, while struggling with survivor's guilt and the growing certainty that she never wanted to hold a weapon again. Hairdressing had seemed like the perfect escape. It required precision and attention to detail, skills she already possessed, but applied them to creating beauty rather than dealing death. The work was intimate and personal, involving trust and transformation, but in ways that helped rather than harmed. Most importantly, it allowed her to disappear completely from her previous identity. For 2 years, the strategy had worked perfectly. Sophia Martinez, the hairdresser, was everything Staff Sergeant Martinez had never been allowed to be: gentle, nurturing, focused on making people feel beautiful rather than eliminating threats. She'd built a quiet life in Cedar Valley, far from military bases and defense contractors, surrounded by people who knew nothing about ballistics or tactical operations. But Brad Jackson's arrogance was threatening that carefully constructed peace. As Sophia drove home from the salon that evening, she found herself remembering other men like him, soldiers, who'd assumed her small stature and quiet demeanor meant she was weak or incompetent. They'd learned otherwise, usually in ways that were professionally embarrassing and personally humiliating. Her apartment reflected the same careful balance she maintained in all aspects of her life. The living room was decorated with soft colors and comfortable furniture that suggested a woman interested in simple pleasures. But in the bedroom closet, behind boxes of seasonal clothes and old photo albums, was a locked case containing items that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew Sophia Martinez. The case held her personal rifle, a civilian version of the military weapon she'd mastered, along with precision ammunition, advanced optics, and range-finding equipment. She told herself she kept them for sentimental reasons, mementos of a career that had defined her adult life. But she also maintained them in perfect condition, cleaning and calibrating the equipment with the same methodical care she'd once given to mission-critical weapons. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table eating a dinner of leftover Chinese takeout, Sophia found herself calculating without conscious intention. Eagle Eye Shooting Range was 2.3 miles from her apartment. Based on what she'd observed during her lunch break reconnaissance, the outdoor ranges offered shooting distances up to 500 meters. Wind patterns in the valley were generally consistent, flowing from southwest to northeast with predictable afternoon variations. She caught herself mid-calculation and pushed the thoughts away. This was exactly the kind of thinking she'd come to Cedar Valley to escape. She wasn't Staff Sergeant Martinez anymore. She was Sophia the hairdresser, who worried about appointment schedules and product inventory, not ballistic trajectories and target elimination. But as she prepared for bed, Sophia couldn't shake the image of Tyler Anderson's eager face, or Mrs. Henderson's frustration with masculine arrogance, or the cruel laughter she'd heard from the shooting range. Some part of her, the part that had spent 6 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, was responding to a situation that felt uncomfortably familiar. Her dreams that night were filled with the weight of a rifle in her hands, the controlled breathing that preceded perfect shots, and the satisfaction of eliminating threats that endangered good people. She woke at 3 a.m., as she always did, but instead of the usual nightmares about IEDs and dead friends, she found herself thinking about Brad Jackson's dismissive attitude toward anyone he considered inferior. The next morning, as she prepared for another day at the salon, Sophia made a decision that would change everything. She would visit Eagle Eye Shooting Range, not to confront anyone or prove anything, but simply to observe, to understand the full scope of the situation before determining whether it required her intervention. She told herself it was just curiosity, a harmless bit of reconnaissance that wouldn't lead to anything more complicated than satisfying her professional interest in the local shooting community. But deep down, in the part of her mind that had kept her alive through 6 years of impossible missions, Sophia knew she was preparing for war. The quiet hairdresser was about to remember what she was truly capable of. And Brad "Bull" Jackson had no idea what was coming for him. Saturday morning at Eagle Eye Shooting Range buzzed with the kind of aggressive energy that Sophia recognized from her military days. Men competing not just for accuracy, but for dominance in a social hierarchy where the loudest voice often mattered more than actual skill. She'd arrived early, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt that helped her blend into the background, carrying a small notebook that most people would assume contained grocery lists or appointment reminders. The range was busier than she'd expected. At least 30 people had gathered for what appeared to be an informal competition, though the dynamic suggested something more significant was building. Sophia positioned herself near the equipment rental counter, close enough to observe, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. Brad "Bull" Jackson was exactly what she'd anticipated based on the descriptions she'd heard. A large man in his early 40s, he carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to physical intimidation. His voice boomed across the range as he held court near the main shooting bench, surrounded by a circle of men who laughed at his jokes and nodded agreement with his pronouncements. "I'm telling you, boys," Jackson was saying, gesturing broadly with a beer that definitely shouldn't have been allowed on an active shooting range. "Real marksmanship is about more than just pulling a trigger. It's about understanding ballistics, wind compensation, target leading, skills that take years to develop. Not something you pick up from watching YouTube videos or taking some weekend safety course." Luke Harrison, the range instructor Sophia had noticed during her previous reconnaissance, stood slightly apart from Jackson's group. Harrison was older, probably in his 50s, with the quiet bearing of someone who'd seen actual combat. His body language suggested professional respect for accuracy over showmanship, and Sophia could see him wince slightly at some of Jackson's more outrageous claims. "Bull's got a point," said one of Jackson's admirers, a thin man with nervous energy who seemed desperate for approval. "I mean, shooting isn't like other sports where anybody can just walk in and compete. It requires natural talent and serious training." Jackson nodded sagely, as if he'd just shared profound wisdom. "Exactly, Danny. That's why I keep saying this range should have standards. Maybe some kind of qualification process before people can use the advanced courses. Too many wannabes cluttering up the place, thinking they're marksmen because they hit a target at 50 yards. Sophia's jaw tightened as she listened to the conversation. She'd heard similar attitudes throughout her military career. The assumption that competence could be determined by appearance, background, or social status rather than actual performance. It was the kind of thinking that had led male soldiers to challenge her abilities right up until the moment she demonstrated skills that left them speechless. Tina Brooks, one of the few women at the range, approached Jackson's group with obvious reluctance. She was probably in her 30s, dressed in practical shooting gear, carrying herself with the careful confidence of someone who'd learned to navigate male-dominated spaces. Sophia had noticed her earlier, shooting with methodical precision at the 200-meter range while Jackson held court at the closer targets. "Boo," Tina said, her voice carefully neutral. "I heard you're organizing some kind of formal competition. I'd like to participate." The group fell silent, and Sophia could practically feel the testosterone-fueled tension that followed. Jackson's smile was condescending, the expression of someone about to deliver what he considered gentle correction to a confused child. "Tina, sweetheart," Jackson said, his tone dripping with false kindness, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, I really do. But what we're planning is serious competition. Long-range precision shooting under challenging conditions. It's not really appropriate for recreational shooters." The dismissal was so casual, so automatically condescending, that Sophia felt her hands clench involuntarily. She'd been on the receiving end of identical attitudes countless times, and watching another woman face the same treatment brought back memories she'd tried to suppress. "I shoot here regularly," Tina replied, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious frustration. "I've qualified at distances up to 400 meters. I think I can handle whatever challenge you're planning." Jackson's followers exchanged glances that communicated volumes about their assessment of women's capabilities. Danny, the nervous man seeking approval, decided to demonstrate his loyalty by joining the mockery. 400 meters? He said, with exaggerated surprise. "Wow, that's almost impressive. Of course, we're talking about real long-range work. Distances where wind compensation and atmospheric conditions matter. Technical stuff that requires years of experience. Plus," added another member of Jackson's circle, "the equipment requirements are pretty specialized. I mean, no offense, but you'd need serious gear. Military-grade optics, precision ammunition, custom loads. It gets expensive fast." Sophia watched Harrison's expression throughout the exchange. The range instructor clearly disapproved of the dismissive treatment, but seemed reluctant to directly challenge Jackson's authority in front of his supporters. It was a familiar dynamic, decent people staying silent while bullies dominated social situations through aggressive confidence. "Tell you what, Tina," Jackson said, his voice taking on the tone of someone offering a generous compromise. "Why don't you stick around and watch? You might learn something. Maybe after the real competition, we can set up some kind of beginner-friendly event. Something more suitable for your skill level." The patronizing offer was delivered with such Casual cruelty that Sophia found herself taking an involuntary step forward. Every instinct she'd developed during years of protecting people from threats was responding to the situation, recognizing patterns of abuse and intimidation that demanded intervention. Tyler Anderson chose that moment to arrive at the range, still carrying himself with the rigid posture of someone fresh from basic training. Sophia recognized him immediately from the salon, and she could see him scanning the crowd with the eager energy of someone hoping to prove himself among more experienced shooters. "Tyler," Jackson called out, having apparently met the young soldier before. "Just in time, son. We were just explaining to Tina here about the technical challenges of real precision shooting. Maybe you can share some insights from your military training." Tyler looked uncomfortable being thrust into the middle of what was obviously a tense situation. "Well, sir, I'm just out of basic training. I don't really have much experience with long-range work yet. But you understand the principles," Jackson pressed. "The kind of discipline and training required for serious marksmanship. Not something everyone can just pick up as a hobby, right?" Sophia could see Tyler struggling with the situation. His military training had taught him respect for chain of command and deference to experience, but his grandmother's values had instilled basic courtesy toward women. The conflict was visible in his expression as he tried to find a response that wouldn't offend anyone. "I think," Tyler said carefully, "that shooting is mostly about practice and proper instruction. Gender probably doesn't matter as much as dedication and training." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of women's capabilities, but it was diplomatically neutral enough to avoid directly challenging Jackson, while not completely dismissing Tina's abilities. Jackson's expression suggested he'd expected more enthusiastic support for his position. "Well," Jackson said, his voice taking on a slightly harder edge, "I suppose we'll see about that. The competition I'm organizing will settle questions about who belongs at what level. Real shooters versus weekend warriors. People with natural talent versus people who think enthusiasm can substitute for ability." Harrison finally stepped forward, apparently deciding the situation had gone far enough. "Bull, what exactly are you planning for this competition? Because this range has safety protocols and insurance requirements that need to be considered." Jackson's smile was triumphant, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this question. "I'm talking about a real test of marksmanship, Luke. Multiple distances, challenging conditions, scored competition that will establish once and for all who the serious shooters are in this community." He gestured toward the longest range available. "At the facility, we start at 300 meters, work up to 500. Multiple targets, time constraints, wind compensation. The kind of shooting that separates real marksmen from people who think they can compete just because they've watched a few movies." As Jackson outlined his plans, Sophia found herself automatically calculating the technical challenges he was describing. Wind patterns at 500 meters in the valley's terrain, sight adjustments for multiple distances, target acquisition under time pressure. It was exactly the kind of shooting she'd mastered during her military career, but she also recognized it as deliberately designed to intimidate and exclude anyone Jackson considered unworthy. The competition was scheduled for the following Saturday, giving participants a week to prepare. Entry fee was $200, which Jackson claimed would go toward prizes and range rental. But Sophia suspected was also meant to exclude people who couldn't afford to lose that much money on what might be a rigged contest. As the crowd began to disperse, with Jackson holding court about the technical challenges facing serious competitors, Sophia remained in position, observing and planning. She'd seen enough to understand the full scope of the situation, and every instinct she'd developed during 6 years of military service was telling her that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to demonstrate capabilities they couldn't dismiss or explain away. The quiet hairdresser was about to make a decision that would change everything. But first, she needed to visit her apartment closet and reconnect with tools she'd hoped never to use again. Monday morning at Glamour and Grace Salon brought an unexpected visitor. Tina Brooke stood hesitantly at the entrance, clearly unfamiliar with the salon environment, but determined to follow through on whatever had brought her there. Sophia looked up from organizing her station and immediately recognized the woman from Saturday's confrontation at the shooting range. "Hi," Tina said, approaching Sophia's chair with obvious uncertainty. "I'm not sure if you remember me, but I think I saw you at Eagle Eye on Saturday. I was wondering, do you happen to know anything about competitive shooting?" The question caught Sophia off guard. She'd been careful to remain unnoticed during her reconnaissance, but apparently she hadn't been as invisible as she'd thought. "I was there briefly," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" Tina settled into the salon chair, and Sophia could see the frustration and determination warring in her expression. "I need help, and I'm running out of options. That man, Brad Jackson, he's basically challenged every woman in the shooting community to prove we belong. The problem is, his competition is designed to make us fail." As Sophia began the consultation process, asking about desired cuts and colors, Tina explained the situation in more detail. Jackson had been systematically discouraging women from participating in local shooting events for months. He'd created an environment where female shooters felt unwelcome, criticized, and constantly judged by standards that seemed to shift whenever women started succeeding. "The worst part," Tina continued, "is that some of the other women are starting to believe him. They're convincing themselves that maybe we really aren't cut out for long-range precision work, that maybe there's something inherently male about marksmanship that we'll never understand." Sophia's hands moved with practiced efficiency, sectioning Tina's hair while processing the implications of what she was hearing. This wasn't just about one man's ego or even about shooting sports. It was about systematic intimidation designed to exclude and diminish an entire group of people based on assumptions that had nothing to do with actual capability. "Have you considered filing a complaint with the range management?" Sophia asked. Tina's laugh was bitter. "Jackson brings in too much business. Half the men who shoot there regularly are his friends or admirers. Luke Harrison means well, but he's not going to risk his job by challenging the range's most profitable customer." As the conversation continued, Sophia learned more about the local shooting community's dynamics. Jackson had carefully positioned himself as the unofficial authority on serious marksmanship, using his loud personality and aggressive confidence to intimidate anyone who might challenge his dominance. Women who tried to participate were subjected to constant criticism, condescending advice, and helpful suggestions that they might be more comfortable with less challenging activities. "The thing is," Tina said, her voice carrying both frustration and determination, "I know I'm a good shot. I've been practicing for 3 years. And my groups at 300 meters are consistently better than most of the men who follow Jackson around. But somehow, whenever I'm shooting around them, everything I do gets analyzed and criticized until I start second-guessing myself." Sophia recognized the pattern immediately. It was psychological warfare disguised as constructive feedback, designed to undermine confidence and create self-doubt. She'd seen male soldiers use similar tactics against female personnel, particularly in specialized roles where women's success challenged traditional assumptions about gender and capability. "What's your plan for the competition?" Sophia asked, continuing to work on Tina's hair while carefully gathering intelligence about Jackson's challenge. "That's why I'm here," Tina admitted. "I heard you asking questions about military terminology when Tyler Anderson was in here. I thought maybe you had some kind of background that might help. I know it's a long shot, but I'm desperate for any advice that might give me an edge." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sophia. Here was a woman seeking help from someone she assumed might have limited military knowledge, completely unaware that she was talking to one of the most skilled precision shooters the Army had ever produced. It was exactly the kind of underestimation that had defined Sophia's entire civilian experience. "I might be able to offer some basic advice," Sophia said carefully. "What specific challenges are you most concerned about?" As Tina described Jackson's competition format, Sophia's military training automatically began analyzing the tactical situation. Multiple target distances, time constraints, wind compensation requirements. It was a demanding course of fire, but not beyond the capabilities of a competent shooter with proper preparation and equipment. The real challenge, Sophia realized, wasn't technical, it was psychological. Jackson had created an environment where women were expected to fail, where any mistake would be attributed to inherent gender limitations, and where success would be dismissed as luck or favorable conditions. The competition wasn't just about shooting. It was about maintaining a social hierarchy that benefited Jackson and his supporters. "The technical aspects aren't insurmountable," Sophia said, finishing Tina's cut and beginning the styling process. "But you need to understand that this isn't really about marksmanship. It's about power and control. Jackson isn't just trying to win. He's trying to prove that women don't belong in his space." Tina nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I can't back down. If I don't compete, it confirms everything he's been saying. If I compete and fail, it proves his point. But if I don't try at all, then he wins by default." As Sophia put the finishing touches on Tina's hair, she found herself facing a decision that went far beyond professional courtesy or community solidarity. She could offer general advice and encouragement, maintaining her carefully constructed civilian identity while watching another woman face the same kind of systematic discrimination she'd encountered throughout her military career. Or she could take a more direct approach. "Tina," Sophia said, meeting her client's eyes in the mirror, "what if I told you that Jackson's competition might not go the way he expects?" "What do you mean?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, weighing the consequences of what she was about to reveal. What if someone with actual expertise decided to participate? Someone Jackson doesn't know about, who could demonstrate exactly how wrong his assumptions are. Tina's expression shifted from curiosity to hope. "Do you know someone like that? Someone who could actually beat him at his own game?" Before Sophia could answer, the salon door chimed and Deanna Foster entered with her usual whirlwind energy, followed immediately by Megan Clark carrying coffee for everyone. The moment for revelation passed, and Sophia found herself back in her role as the quiet hairdresser who minded her own business. But as Tina left the salon with her new haircut and a promise to think about their conversation, Sophia was already making plans. That evening, she would visit her apartment closet and reconnect with equipment she'd maintained in perfect condition despite telling herself she'd never use it again. The decision had been made, though she hadn't consciously acknowledged it yet. Brad Jackson was about to discover that his assumptions about women, about civilians, and about who belonged in his shooting community were catastrophically wrong. The quiet hairdresser was done being invisible, and the shooting community of Cedar Valley was about to learn what real marksmanship looked like when it came from someone who'd actually used those skills to save lives in combat. Zones halfway around the world. Jackson had wanted a competition that would prove his superiority once and for all. He was about to get exactly what he'd asked for, just not in the way he'd expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wednesday evening found Sophia in her apartment, staring at the locked case she'd hidden behind winter coats and forgotten photo albums. For 2 years, she'd successfully avoided opening it, telling herself that the equipment inside represented a life she'd deliberately left behind. But Brad Jackson's systematic intimidation of women shooters had awakened something in her that peaceful civilian life hadn't been able to fully suppress. The case opened with a soft click, revealing equipment that most people would never see outside of military installations or specialized law enforcement units. Her personal rifle, a precision-built platform based on military specifications, but modified for civilian ownership, lay in custom foam padding alongside hand-loaded ammunition, advanced optics, and range-finding equipment that had cost more than most people's cars. As she lifted the rifle from its case, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved automatically through the inspection routine she'd performed thousands of times, checking the action, examining the barrel crown, testing the trigger pull that had been adjusted to exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure. The weapon felt familiar in a way that surprised her, like reconnecting with a part of herself she'd thought was permanently severed. The next morning at the salon, Sophia's colleagues noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She was still professional, still precise in her work, but there was an edge of focused intensity that hadn't been there before. Diana Foster, always sensitive to her employees' moods, approached during a break between clients. "Everything okay?" "Sophia, you seem, different today. More focused than usual, if that's even possible." "Just thinking about some personal projects," Sophia replied, which was technically true. Preparing to systematically dismantle Brad Jackson's ego and demonstrate the fatal flaws in his assumptions about women's capabilities definitely qualified as a personal project. Tyler Anderson arrived at lunchtime, not for his grandmother, but to ask Sophia a question that had been bothering him since their brief interaction about his military occupation. He approached her station with the carefully respectful manner that fresh soldiers used when addressing anyone they suspected might outrank them. "Ma'am," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard, "I've been thinking about what you said about cavalry scouts and reconnaissance. The way you knew about military specialties. Were you in the service?" The direct question caught Sophia off guard. She'd been so focused on preparing for the shooting competition that she'd let her operational security slip. Tyler was young and inexperienced, but he'd received enough military training to recognize when someone possessed knowledge that didn't match their apparent background. "I was," she said simply, deciding that partial honesty was less dangerous than obvious deception. "Different branch, different specialty. Why do you ask?" Tyler's expression shifted to something approaching excitement. "I knew it. There was something about the way you carried yourself, the way you organized your equipment. My drill sergeants moved the same way, like everything had a purpose and a place." "Tyler," Sophia said carefully, "I'd appreciate it if you kept that information to yourself. I don't discuss my military service publicly." "Yes, ma'am, absolutely. But can I ask you something about that shooting competition at Eagle Eye? Jackson's been telling everyone that women don't have the physical or mental capabilities for serious long-range work. Says it's just biological reality, but that doesn't seem right to me." Sophia's hands never paused in their work styling Mrs. Patterson's hair, but her voice carried an edge that made Tyler straighten unconsciously. "What do you think, Tyler? Based on your military training, is marksmanship primarily about physical strength or mental discipline?" "Mental discipline, ma'am, absolutely. Breathing control, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, it's all about concentration and consistency." "And do you think those qualities are limited to men?" Tyler's face reddened slightly. "No, ma'am. Some of the best shots in my basic training company were women. But Jackson seems so confident, and he has all these followers who agree with him." "Tyler," Sophia said, meeting his eyes in the mirror, "confidence without competence is just arrogance. And arrogance has a way of creating situations where people get humiliated in very public ways." The young soldier studied her reflection, clearly trying to piece together information that didn't quite fit the picture of a simple hairdresser. "Ma'am, are you planning to do something about Jackson's competition?" Before Sophia could answer, the salon door chimed and Luke Harrison entered. The range instructor looked uncomfortable in the salon environment, clearly out of his element among hairdryers and styling chairs. He approached Sophia's station with the careful manner of someone delivering unpleasant news. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you Sophia Martinez?" "I'm Luke Harrison from Eagle Eye Shooting Range. I was hoping I could speak with you privately about a situation we have developing." Sophia finished Mrs. Patterson's styling and walked Harrison to a quiet corner of the salon. His expression was grim, and she could see the kind of concern that came from experience with potentially dangerous situations. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you've been asking questions about our facility and about Brad Jackson's competition. I also heard that Tina Brooks came to see you, probably looking for advice." Sophia waited, not confirming or denying anything. Harrison continued, "I'm going to be direct with you. Jackson is planning something that goes way beyond a simple shooting competition. He's been recruiting shooters from outside the local community, men with military or law enforcement backgrounds who owe him favors. The whole thing is designed to humiliate any woman who tries to participate." "That's unfortunate for the women involved," Sophia said carefully. "It's worse than unfortunate. It's potentially dangerous. Jackson's ego has reached the point where he's willing to risk people's safety to prove his point. Some of the modifications he's planning for the competition violate basic range safety protocols." Harrison paused, studying Sophia's face for reactions. "The reason I'm here is that several people have mentioned you asking detailed questions about the range layout, the competition format, and Jackson's background. Combined with what Tyler Anderson told me about your apparent military knowledge, I'm wondering if you're planning to get involved in this situation." The moment of decision had arrived faster than Sophia had expected. She could continue maintaining her civilian cover, express concern but avoid involvement, and watch from the sidelines as Jackson continued his systematic intimidation of women shooters. Or she could acknowledge what Harrison had clearly already suspected. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "what would you say if I told you that Jackson's assumptions about women's shooting capabilities might be about to be tested in ways he hasn't anticipated?" Harrison's expression shifted to something between hope and concern. "I'd say that anyone planning to challenge Jackson better understand what they're getting into. He's not just a braggart with a loud mouth. He's actually a competent shooter with expensive equipment and years of experience. And if someone with superior training and better equipment decided to participate in his competition, then," Harrison said slowly, "Jackson might finally learn that talking tough and being tough are two very different things." Sophia looked around the salon, at Diana organizing appointment schedules, at Megan chatting with clients, at Tyler watching their conversation with obvious interest, and realized that her quiet civilian life was about to end. The skills she'd spent 2 years trying to suppress were about to be unleashed in a very public demonstration of exactly how wrong Brad Jackson's assumptions were. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I think Jackson's competition is about to become much more interesting than he planned." As the range instructor left the salon with a mixture of anticipation and concern on his face, Sophia began mentally preparing for a transformation that would shock the entire shooting community of Cedar Valley. The hairdresser was about to become the sniper again, and Brad Bull Jackson was about to discover that underestimating people based on appearances was a mistake that could destroy everything he thought he knew about marksmanship, competition, and his own capabilities. Saturday morning arrived with perfect shooting weather, clear skies, minimal wind, and the kind of crisp air that made long-range precision work almost enjoyable. Sophia arrived at Eagle Eye Shooting Range in her civilian pickup truck, her equipment case locked in the truck bed under a weatherproof cover that could have contained camping gear or construction tools. To the gathering crowd, she looked like any other curious spectator drawn by word of Jackson's much-publicized competition. The scene at the range resembled a small festival. Jackson had promoted his ultimate marksmanship challenge throughout the county, attracting not just local shooters but competitors from neighboring towns who'd heard about the substantial cash prizes and bragging rights at stake. A crowd of nearly 60 people had gathered, including family members, friends, and what appeared to be several local reporters drawn by Jackson's confident predictions about demonstrating real shooting versus weekend warrior fantasies. Jackson himself was in his element, holding court near the registration table with the kind of aggressive confidence that Sophia recognized from bullies throughout her military career. He wore expensive shooting gear, custom jacket, precision ground glasses, equipment that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and carried himself like a man absolutely certain of his superiority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying easily across the range, "today we're going to settle some long-standing questions about what constitutes serious marksmanship. I've designed this competition to test skills that separate genuine precision shooters from people who think enthusiasm can substitute for talent and training." Sophia positioned herself near the back of the crowd, close enough to observe, but maintaining the invisible presence she'd perfected during her civilian years. She watched Jackson outline the competition format with the analytical focus she'd once brought to studying enemy positions. The challenge consisted of 5 stages, starting at 200 meters and progressing to 500 meters, with increasingly difficult conditions at each distance. Time limits, multiple targets, wind flags that indicated variable conditions, and scoring that heavily penalized misses. It was a demanding course of fire, but Sophia recognized it as well within the capabilities of any competent precision shooter. More importantly, she could see the psychological warfare embedded in Jackson's design. The progression was intended to eliminate competitors gradually, building pressure and self-doubt while showcasing Jackson's superiority at each stage. By the time they reached the final 500-meter challenge, most participants would be rattled, demoralized, and primed for failure. "Entry fee is $250, Jackson continued. "But I guarantee that anyone who completes this course will have earned genuine respect from the shooting community. This isn't about participation trophies or feel-good inclusivity. This is about proving you belong among serious marksmen." Tina Brooks stepped forward from the crowd, carrying a rifle case and wearing shooting gear that looked professional but not extravagant. Sophia could see the determination in her posture, but also the tension that came from knowing she was walking into a situation designed for her failure. "I'd like to register," Tina said, her voice steady despite the obvious hostility from Jackson's supporters. Jackson's smile was patronizing, the expression of someone offering a foolish child an expensive lesson in reality. "Tina, I admire your persistence, I really do. But are you sure you want to subject yourself to this level of competition? These are challenging conditions, and the entry fee is non-refundable." "I'm sure," Tina replied, placing $250 on the registration table with deliberate precision. The exchange drew murmurs from the crowd, some supportive, others dismissive, all anticipating the public humiliation that Jackson had basically promised to deliver. Sophia watched several other women in the crowd exchange glances, clearly debating whether to follow Tina's example or avoid the risk of public failure. "Anyone else?" Jackson asked, scanning the crowd with the confidence of someone whose victory was already assured. "Remember, this is serious competition. I'd hate for anyone to embarrass themselves unnecessarily." Tyler Anderson stepped forward, young and nervous, but determined to prove himself among the adult shooters. 3 other men from the local shooting community registered, along with 2 visitors from neighboring counties who'd driven specifically to test themselves against Jackson's challenge. As registration closed and competitors began preparing their equipment, Sophia made her decision. She walked to her truck, retrieved her equipment case, and approached the registration table with the quiet confidence that had once made her legendary among military precision shooters. "I'd like to register," she said simply, Placing $250 on the table, Jackson looked up from his preparation routine, clearly not recognizing her despite her months of visibility around Cedar Valley. "I'm sorry, miss, but registration is closed. This is a serious competition with technical requirements that take time to explain." "I understand the requirements," Sophia replied, her voice carrying a tone of authority that made several nearby competitors look up from their equipment. "I'd like to participate." The crowd's attention focused on the unexpected development. Jackson's expression shifted from dismissive politeness to annoyed condescension as he studied Sophia's appearance: jeans, simple t-shirt, equipment case that looked military surplus rather than expensive civilian gear. "Ma'am," Jackson said, his voice taking on the exaggerated patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a confused child, "this competition involves precision shooting at distances up to 500 meters under challenging conditions. It requires specialized equipment, extensive training, and experience with ballistic calculations that most recreational shooters have never encountered." Sophia met his gaze with the steady calm that had once intimidated enemy snipers across 3 different theaters of operation. "I have the required equipment and training." Jackson's supporters exchanged glances that communicated their amusement at another woman's apparent delusion about her capabilities. Danny, Jackson's nervous admirer, decided to demonstrate his loyalty by joining the educational effort. 500 meters is serious long-range work," he said condescendingly. "Wind compensation, atmospheric pressure, target movement. It's not like shooting at the local indoor range. You need military-grade equipment and years of experience to be competitive at these distances." "I understand," Sophia said quietly, opening her equipment case with movements that were economical, precise, and somehow threatening despite their apparent simplicity. The rifle that emerged from the case drew immediate attention from everyone who knew enough about firearms to recognize quality. It was clearly built for precision work, heavy barrel, advanced optics, custom stock, but there was something about its configuration that suggested purpose beyond recreational shooting. Luke Harrison, who'd been watching the exchange with growing interest, stepped closer to examine Sophia's equipment. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise to something approaching recognition as he studied the rifle's specifications and the way Sophia handled it. "Ma'am," Harrison said quietly, "that's some serious equipment you have there. Mind if I ask about your background?" Before Sophia could answer, Jackson intervened with the aggressive confidence of someone reasserting control over his domain. "Luke, I'm sure the lady has read all about precision shooting online, but there's a difference between owning expensive gear and knowing how to use it effectively." Sophia looked around at the crowd of spectators and competitors, all waiting to see how she'd respond to Jackson's dismissal. For 2 years, she'd accepted similar condescension, hidden her capabilities, allowed people to underestimate her because it served her desire for a quiet civilian life. But some situations demanded a different response. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice carrying across the range with the kind of authority that made experienced soldiers stop what they were doing and pay attention, "I think your competition is about to become much more educational than you anticipated." The crowd fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Jackson's confident smile faltered slightly as he studied Sophia's expression and recognized something that didn't match his assumptions about confused civilians with expensive toys. The hairdresser was gone. In her place stood someone whose presence commanded respect and whose capabilities were about to be demonstrated in ways that would change everything Jackson thought he knew about marksmanship, women, and his own position in the local shooting community. The first stage of Jackson's competition began at 200 meters with what he considered a warm-up course of fire, 5 shots in 3 minutes at standard bullseye targets. Simple enough for experienced shooters, but designed to eliminate anyone whose nerves couldn't handle the pressure of timed precision work. Jackson shot first, naturally, delivering a respectable group that kept all 5 shots within the scoring rings, with casual confidence that drew appreciative murmurs from his supporters. Tina Brooks followed, her shots slightly less consistent, but still competent enough to advance to the next stage. Tyler Anderson managed 4 good shots with 1 flyer that cost him points, but kept him in competition. The other local shooters performed predictably, some advancing, others eliminated by the combination of time pressure and public scrutiny. When Sophia's turn came, she approached the firing line with movements that were economical and purposeful. No wasted motion, no visible nerves, just the kind of professional calm that Harrison recognized from his own military experience. She settled into position behind her rifle with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual thousands of times under conditions far more challenging than a county shooting. Competition. Her first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack that echoed off the range's backstop. Through the spotting scope, the range officer called out, "X-ring, center." The second shot followed 4 seconds later, Kring touching the first. By the third shot, the crowd had fallen silent, watching someone demonstrate shooting that went beyond mere competence into the realm of artistry. Each shot was placed with mathematical precision, building a group so tight that the spotting scope operator had to use higher magnification to distinguish individual holes. "Jesus Christ, Danny," whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "She's shooting 1 hole." Jackson's confident smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by the expression of someone watching their fundamental assumptions about the world being systematically destroyed. The 4th shot expanded the group by perhaps a 1/4 inch. The 5th shot, fired with the same mechanical precision as the first, completed a group that measured less than half an inch at 200 meters. "Time," the range officer called, though Sophia had finished with nearly a minute to spare. "Perfect score." 5 shots, all X-ring, group measurement 0.43 inches. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jackson's most loyal supporters stared at the target in disbelief, trying to process shooting that was beyond anything they'd witnessed at local competitions. Harrison approached the target with a measuring caliper, double-checking what everyone could already see. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and curiosity, "that's some of the finest shooting I've ever seen at this range. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Previous employment," Sophia replied simply, already packing her equipment for the move to the 300-meter line. The second stage increased the difficulty with moving targets, crosswind conditions, and a tighter time limit. Jackson shot with visible tension, his previous casual confidence replaced by the focused intensity of someone who suddenly realized he was in a real competition. His group was respectable but not exceptional, good enough to advance, but far from the dominating performance he'd planned. Tina Brooks struggled with the wind conditions, managing 3 good shots but dropping 2 that cost her valuable points. Tyler Anderson, rattled by what he'd witnessed at the first stage, pulled 1 shot completely off target and was eliminated from competition. When Sophia returned to the firing line, the crowd pressed closer to watch. Word had spread throughout the range that something extraordinary was happening, drawing spectators who'd never seen precision shooting that challenged the limits of what civilian equipment could achieve. The moving targets required different skills: timing, lid calculation, smooth tracking, but Sophia adapted with the same professional calm she demonstrated at the stationary targets. Her shots followed the targets with mechanical precision, each impact recorded by the electronic scoring system as perfect center hits. 5 for 5, the range officer announced. Perfect score, second stage. Jackson's face had gone pale, the reality of his situation becoming undeniable. This wasn't luck or favorable conditions. This was systematic demonstration of capabilities that exceeded anything in his experience. Several of his supporters had begun edging away from their association with him, recognizing that their leader was about to be humiliated in the most public way possible. The third stage moved to 400 meters, with reduced target sizes and variable wind conditions indicated by flags positioned at different points down the range. The wind was tricky, swirling patterns that required constant adjustment, and the kind of experience that came from years of shooting in challenging conditions. Jackson's performance deteriorated further under the pressure. 2 of his 5 shots missed the scoring rings entirely, effectively eliminating him from serious contention while maintaining the pretense that he was still competing. His face showed the kind of desperate frustration that came from watching carefully constructed superiority crumble in real time. Sophia's approach to the wind challenges revealed training that went far beyond civilian shooting sports. She spent nearly a minute reading the wind flags, calculating conditions at multiple points along the bullet's trajectory. Her shots were spaced with deliberate timing, waiting for lulls in the wind pattern and taking advantage of atmospheric conditions that most shooters couldn't even detect. The results were inevitable. 5 shots, 5 perfect hits. Group measurement that defied the limits of what most people thought possible at 400 meters with civilian equipment. "Ma'am," Harrison said, approaching Sophia as she prepared for the 4th stage, "I need to ask directly, what was your military occupation?" The crowd leaned closer, finally understanding that they were witnessing something far beyond a typical shooting competition. Jackson's bragging about real marksmanship and serious shooters had attracted someone whose capabilities made his boasting look like amateur theater. "Special operations," Sophia replied quietly. "Precision shooting specialist." The murmur that ran through the crowd carried a mixture of awe, understanding, and for Jackson's supporters, growing embarrassment about their previous dismissiveness toward women shooters. The 4th stage at 450 meters introduced multiple targets at varying distances, requiring rapid target acquisition and the kind of versatility that separated specialist shooters from recreational enthusiasts. Jackson attempted the course, but his performance was so poor that he essentially withdrew from serious competition, maintaining appearances while accepting inevitable defeat. Sophia's run through the 4th stage demonstrated skills that belonged in military training videos rather than county shooting competitions. Rapid target transitions, instant range estimation, wind compensation that seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. Each target felt a single shots placed with surgical precision, no wasted ammunition, no second chances required. Perfect. Score: 4 stages completed. The range officer announced to a crowd that had grown to include most of the range's daily visitors. As they prepared for the final stage at 500 meters, Jackson made one last attempt to maintain his dignity through psychological warfare. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "military training is one thing, but civilian competition is different. No spotters, no unlimited ammunition, no backup equipment. Just you and the target." Sophia looked at him with the calm assessment she'd once reserved for threats that required elimination. "Mr. Jackson," she said quietly, "you're about to learn the difference between talking about marksmanship and actually demonstrating it." The final stage awaited, and with it, the completion of a demonstration that would become legendary in Cedar Valley's shooting community. Jackson had wanted to prove his superiority once and for all. He was about to get exactly what he'd asked for, just not in the way he'd imagined. The 5th and final stage at 500 meters represented the ultimate test of Jackson's serious marksmanship philosophy. 3 targets positioned at varying heights, 15 shots total, wind conditions that required constant adjustment, and a time limit that would challenge even experienced precision shooters. It was the moment Jackson had designed to showcase his superiority and eliminate any remaining pretenders to his throne as Cedar Valley's premier marksman. What remained of Jackson's Confidence evaporated entirely as he approached the firing line for his final attempt. His previous stages had been progressively worse, and everyone present, including his most loyal supporters, understood that he was facing public humiliation on a scale that would destroy his reputation permanently. His hands shook slightly. As he loaded his rifle, the psychological pressure of competing against someone with obviously superior skills, having shattered his usual aggressive composure, his performance was predictably poor. Of 15 shots, only 7 found the scoring rings, with several missing the targets entirely. The man who'd spent months bragging about real marksmanship and dismissing women's capabilities had just demonstrated shooting that wouldn't qualify him for most basic military units. Score for Mr. Jackson, the range officer announced with professional neutrality. 7 hits out of 15. Total score, 340 points. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, filled with the kind of embarrassment that comes from watching someone's carefully constructed image collapse completely. Jackson's supporters found excuses to examine their equipment or check their phones, unable to meet his eyes as he walked away from the firing line with the hollow expression of someone whose fundamental beliefs about himself had just been proven. False dot. As Sophia approached the 500-meter line for her final demonstration, Luke Harrison made an announcement that formalized what everyone had already suspected. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our final competitor shoots, I think you should know that you're witnessing something extraordinary." Sophia Martinez is a decorated veteran with special operations background, specifically trained in precision shooting at the highest levels of military capability. The crowd's murmur carried a mixture of awe and understanding. Suddenly, everything made sense. The professional equipment, the mechanical precision, the calm confidence that had never wavered despite Jackson's attempts at intimidation. They weren't watching a county shooting competition anymore. They were witnessing a demonstration of skills that belonged in classified military operations. "How many confirmed?" called out someone from the crowd. Using terminology that revealed their own military background, Sophia paused in her equipment preparation, considering how much truth the situation required. 67, she said quietly, her voice carrying. Across the suddenly silent range, the number hung in the air like a physical presence. 67 confirmed eliminations meant 67 human beings, whose lives had ended because of her precision shooting skills. It was a record that placed her among the most effective snipers in military history. Male or female, Tyler Anderson, still present despite his earlier elimination, stepped forward with the kind of respect that young soldiers showed to legendary figures. "Ma'am, what unit?" "If you don't mind me asking." 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to various special operations units as needed, Sophia replied, settling into her shooting position with movements that were now obviously professional rather than recreational. Harrison nodded slowly, his own military experience allowing him to understand the significance of what he'd just heard. "Rangers with special operations attachment for precision work," he explained to the crowd. "That's the absolute top tier of military marksmanship capability." As Sophia prepared for her final 15 shots, the psychological dynamics of the situation had shifted completely. Jackson's competition, designed to prove male superiority in serious marksmanship, had attracted someone whose skills made his boasting look like children playing with toys. The women he'd systematically intimidated were about to be vindicated. In the most spectacular way possible, the wind at 500 meters was tricky, requiring calculations that challenged even experienced shooters. Flags at different distances showed varying conditions: quartering headwind near the firing line, crosswind at 300 meters, swirling patterns near the targets that would affect bullet trajectory in complex ways. Sophia spent nearly 2 minutes reading the conditions, a luxury she'd rarely had during actual combat operations, but one that would ensure absolute precision under these controlled circumstances. Her first shot broke the silence with the sharp crack that had become familiar to the crowd, followed immediately by the range officer's confirmation. X-ring, center mass. The second shot followed 8 seconds later, timed to take advantage of a brief lull in the wind pattern. Ring touching the first. By the fifth shot, the crowd had pressed closer to the firing line, watching someone demonstrate shooting that transcended sport and entered the realm of military art. Each shot was placed with mathematical precision, the kind of accuracy that had once eliminated high-value targets in conditions far more challenging than a controlled range. Environment. Shot 10 completed the first target with a group that measured less than 2 inches at 500 meters, shooting. That would have been exceptional at half that distance. Sophia transitioned to the second target without pause, her movements economical and purposeful, as she adjusted for the different angle and elevation. The 11th through 13th shots followed the same pattern of mechanical precision. Each impact placed exactly where ballistic calculations indicated it should be. No wasted motion, no second chances required. Just the systematic demonstration of capabilities that had been honed through years of operations where missing meant soldiers died. 14 X-rings, the range officer announced as Sophia prepared for her final shot. 1 shot remaining. The crowd held its collective breath as she settled into position for the 15th and final shot. This wasn't just about completing a perfect score anymore. It was about demonstrating that Jackson's assumptions about women, about civilians, about who belonged in the shooting community were not just wrong but catastrophically ignorant. Final shot seemed to hang in the air longer than the others, though it traveled the same 500 meters in the same 0.7 seconds of flight time. When it impacted the target with the same precision as the 14 that preceded it, the silence was absolute. Perfect score, Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the range with the kind of reverence usually reserved for witnessing. History. 15 shots, 15 X-rings, total possible points achieved. The crowd erupted in applause that had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Jackson stood at the edge of the group, his face showing the hollow expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been systematically demolished by a woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant. Sophia rose from her shooting position and began packing her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd demonstrated throughout the competition. The transformation was complete. The quiet hairdresser had revealed herself as one of the most skilled precision shooters anyone present had ever seen. "Ma'am," Tina Brooks said, approaching with tears in her eyes, "thank you. You've just proven everything I've been trying to say for months." Sophia looked around at the faces surrounding her, some awed, some embarrassed, all fundamentally changed by what they'd witnessed. The shooting community of Cedar Valley would never be the same, and Brad Jackson's reign as the local authority on serious marksmanship was permanently ended. The truth had been revealed in the most definitive way possible. 15 perfect shots. That silenced not just the range, but every assumption about what women could accomplish when given the opportunity to demonstrate their actual capabilities. The aftermath of Sophia's perfect performance created a social earthquake that rippled through Cedar Valley's shooting community with the force of a natural disaster. Word of the competition spread beyond the range within hours, carried by smartphone. Videos and social media posts that captured not just the incredible shooting, but the complete dismantling of Brad Jackson's arrogant assumptions about women's capabilities. Jackson himself had disappeared immediately after the final scores were announced, leaving behind his expensive equipment and what remained of his reputation. His supporters found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having publicly aligned themselves with someone whose fundamental beliefs about marksmanship and gender had just been proven spectacularly wrong. Danny, Jackson's most vocal admirer, approached Sophia with the kind of embarrassed humility that comes from recognizing you've been catastrophically wrong about something important. "Ma'am," he said, his previous condescension replaced by genuine respect. "I owe you an apology. We all do. The things we said about women shooters, the assumptions we made. We were completely out of line." Sophia accepted his apology with the same professional calm she'd maintained throughout the competition. But Tyler Anderson could see something different in her posture. The careful invisibility that had defined her civilian persona was gone, replaced by the confident bearing of someone who no longer needed to hide their capabilities. "The problem," Sophia said, addressing not just Danny but the crowd of people who'd gathered around her, "wasn't that you doubted my shooting ability. The problem was that you assumed incompetence based on my appearance and profession instead of giving me the opportunity to demonstrate my actual skills." Luke Harrison stepped forward with an expression that mixed professional admiration with personal embarrassment about his range's tolerance for Jackson's behavior. "Ms. Martinez, I need to apologize for allowing the kind of environment where you felt unwelcome. Jackson's attitude toward women shooters was unacceptable, and I should have addressed it months ago." "The environment wasn't your fault," Sophia replied. "But it's your responsibility to ensure it doesn't continue. Women like Tina Brooks shouldn't have to endure systematic intimidation just to pursue their interests in shooting sports." As the crowd began to disperse, carrying stories that would reshape Cedar Valley's perception of women's capabilities, Tina Brooks remained behind with tears streaming down her face. The validation she'd sought for months had arrived in the most spectacular way possible, delivered by someone who demonstrated that women's shooting abilities could exceed anything the male-dominated community had imagined. "I can't thank you enough," Tina said, her voice thick with emotion. "For months, I've been questioning whether I belonged here, whether Jackson was right about women not having the natural ability for precision shooting. What you did today, ... It changes everything." Sophia's expression softened, revealing the nurturing instincts that had drawn her to hairdressing in the first place. "Tina, you always belonged here. Your shooting was competent from the beginning. The problem was an environment designed to make you doubt yourself. That's not about marksmanship. That's about control and intimidation." Over the following weeks, the transformation of Eagle Eye Shooting Range was remarkable. Jackson's departure had created a power vacuum that Harrison filled by implementing policies that encouraged rather than discouraged women's participation. Safety courses were restructured to eliminate the condescending attitudes that had made female shooters feel unwelcome. Competition formats were redesigned to emphasize skill development rather than social dominance. Most importantly, Sophia's demonstration had attracted women shooters from throughout the region who'd heard about the range where a female veteran had delivered the most impressive shooting performance in local history. Participation by women increased by over 300% within a month, creating a supportive community that Jackson's intimidation tactics had previously prevented. Sophia found herself in the unexpected position of being Cedar Valley's most sought-after shooting instructor. Women who'd been discouraged from precision shooting by male gatekeepers now had access to training from someone whose credentials were beyond question. Her Saturday mornings were booked months in advance with students eager to learn from a legendary military marksman. The integration of her two identities, hairdresser and elite shooter, created an interesting dynamic at Glamour Grace Salon. Clients who'd previously seen her as just another service provider now approached her with the respect due to someone whose military service had involved the highest levels of skill and responsibility. "I still can't believe it," Deanna Foster said during a quiet moment between appointments. "For 2 years, I've watched you cut hair and style clients, never suspecting that you were one of the most skilled marksmen in the country. How did you keep that secret for so long?" "It wasn't a secret," Sophia replied, organizing her tools with the same precision she'd always displayed. "It was just irrelevant to my work here. Being a good hairdresser doesn't require military credentials. And being a veteran doesn't make someone automatically good with scissors. But the integration wasn't without challenges. Sophia's newfound visibility in the shooting community meant that her peaceful civilian life was inevitably more complicated. Military contacts who'd lost touch years ago began reaching out. Government contractors offered lucrative positions that would utilize her specialized skills. The quiet anonymity she'd valued was permanently gone. Tyler Anderson became a regular visitor to both the salon and the shooting range, eager to learn from someone whose military experience vastly exceeded his basic training. His grandmother, Mrs. Henderson, took obvious pride in having her hair styled by someone whose service record was now local legend. "Tyler tells me you're teaching him advanced marksmanship techniques," Mrs. Henderson said during one appointment. "I'm so pleased that he has access to proper instruction from someone with your background." The ripple effects extended beyond Cedar Valley's shooting community. Regional competitions began actively recruiting women participants, recognizing that Jackson's philosophy had likely excluded talented shooters whose abilities had never been properly evaluated. Military recruiters started visiting the range, specifically to identify women with potential for specialized roles. 6 months after the competition, Eagle Eye Shooting Range had been transformed from a male-dominated space where women faced systematic discouragement to a welcoming community that actively supported shooters regardless of gender. The change was so dramatic that shooting sports organizations began studying Cedar Valley as a model for inclusive competition environments. Brad Jackson himself remained conspicuously absent from the local shooting scene, though rumors suggested he'd relocated to a different county where his reputation hadn't been completely destroyed. His supporters had either disappeared entirely or undergone genuine conversions to more inclusive attitudes about women's capabilities. For Sophia, the most satisfying change was watching women like Tina Brooks flourish in an environment that now encouraged rather than discouraged their participation. Tina had improved dramatically under Sophia's instruction, developing into a genuinely skilled precision shooter whose capabilities rivaled many of the men who'd previously dismissed her. "The best part," Sophia told Harrison during one of their regular conversations about range operations, "isn't that I proved Jackson wrong about women's shooting abilities. The best part is that we've created an environment where other women can discover and develop their own capabilities without facing the kind of systematic discouragement that almost drove Tina away." The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was sustainable. Sophia had done more than win a competition. She'd changed an entire community's understanding of what women could accomplish when given genuine opportunities to demonstrate their abilities. The quiet hairdresser had become a local legend, but she'd also become something more important: a catalyst for change that would benefit generations of women shooters who would never have to face the kind of intimidation that Jackson's reign of arrogance had created. 1 year after the competition that changed everything, Sophia Martinez stood at her salon station on a Tuesday morning, styling the hair of Emma Wilson, a new client who'd specifically requested an appointment with the woman who destroyed that arrogant shooter guy. The story had become local legend, growing in the telling but never losing its essential truth. Systematic underestimation, based on appearances, could lead to spectacular miscalculations. "I still can't believe you kept your military background secret for 2 years, Emma said, watching Sophia work with the same methodical precision that had once made her legendary among special operations units. "Didn't it drive you crazy, listening to people like Jackson make those ignorant comments about women's capabilities?" Sophia's hands never paused in their work, creating layers with mathematical precision, while considering how to explain something that had taken months of reflection to fully understand herself. "The secrecy wasn't about hiding my capabilities," she said finally. "It was about choosing when and how to use them." Sometimes the most powerful response to ignorance is patient preparation followed by undeniable demonstration. The transformation in her life had been more profound than simply becoming Cedar Valley's most famous marksman. The integration of her military identity with her civilian persona had created something new, a woman who could cut hair with artistic skill in the morning and teach precision shooting techniques in the afternoon, moving seamlessly between worlds that most people considered incompatible. Diana Foster had embraced the change with characteristic enthusiasm, recognizing that having a staff member with such unique credentials brought a certain prestige to Glamour and Grace Salon. "We're the only beauty salon in the county with a decorated combat veteran on staff," she'd joke with clients. "If you're not satisfied with your haircut, we have other ways of ensuring compliance." The joke always got laughs, but it also reflected a deeper truth about how Sophia's revelation had changed perceptions throughout Cedar Valley. She was no longer seen as just a hairdresser who happened to be skilled with firearms, or as a veteran who happened to cut hair. She was someone whose diverse capabilities commanded respect in multiple communities simultaneously. The shooting range had become her second workplace in everything but official designation. Saturday mornings found her conducting precision shooting workshops for women who'd driven from neighboring counties to learn from someone whose credentials were beyond question. The waiting list for her instruction extended months into the future, filled with women who'd heard about the supportive environment that had replaced Jackson's intimidation tactics. Tina Brooks had become her most accomplished student, developing into a precision shooter whose skills rivaled many competition-level marksmen. More importantly, Tina had become an advocate and mentor for other women entering the shooting sports community, creating a network of support that ensured Jackson's toxic attitudes could never again dominate the local shooting culture. "I've been thinking about competing at the state level," Tina mentioned during one of their training sessions. "6 months ago, I would never have considered it, but everything you've taught me about confidence and preparation, I think I'm ready." Sophia watched Tina adjust her rifle with movements that had become efficient and purposeful through months of proper instruction. "The technical skills are definitely there," she agreed. "But more importantly, you understand now that competence isn't determined by other people's expectations. It's demonstrated through performance." Tyler Anderson had become a regular presence at both the salon and the shooting range, treating Sophia with the respectful enthusiasm that young soldiers showed to legendary figures. His marksmanship had improved dramatically under her instruction, but more valuable was the lesson he'd learned about assumptions and underestimation. "Ma'am," he said during one training session, "I've been thinking about what happened with Jackson, and I realize I was part of the problem. I didn't actively discriminate against women shooters, but I didn't challenge the people who did. I just accepted their attitudes as normal." It was exactly the kind of self-reflection that Sophia had hoped her demonstration would inspire. "The most dangerous form of discrimination," she replied, "isn't active hostility. It's passive acceptance of systems that exclude people based on irrelevant characteristics. Changing that requires individuals to recognize their responsibility for the environments they help create." Luke Harrison had implemented changes at Eagle Eye Shooting range that went far beyond simply tolerating women's participation. The facility now actively promoted inclusive policies, offered specialized instruction for underrepresented groups, and had become a model for other ranges throughout the region. Participation by women had stabilized at nearly 40% of regular users, creating a community that bore no resemblance to the male-dominated space that Jackson had controlled. The business case for inclusion turned out to be overwhelming, Harrison explained during one of their regular conversations about range operations. "Women shooters tend to be more safety conscious, more interested in proper instruction, and more likely to bring friends and family members. Jackson's intimidation tactics weren't just morally wrong. They were economically stupid." But perhaps the most satisfying change was the broader impact on Cedar Valley's understanding of assumptions and underestimation. Sophia's story had become A cautionary tale about the dangers of judging people based on appearances, professions, or social expectations. Other businesses had begun examining their own practices, recognizing that valuable capabilities might be hiding in plain sight among employees or customers they'd previously dismissed. The local newspaper had run a feature story about the lessons of the shooting range, exploring how systematic bias could blind communities to the talents and contributions of their own members. Schools had invited Sophia to speak about career diversity and the importance of not limiting people based on traditional gender roles. "What I hope people take from this," Sophia told a group of high school students during one presentation, "isn't that everyone should become a military sniper or that all hairdressers have secret combat skills. The lesson is that human capability is far more diverse and unpredictable than our assumptions suggest. When we create environments that welcome and evaluate people based on their actual performance rather than our preconceptions, everyone benefits." Mrs. Henderson, now 78 and still Sophia's most loyal client, had perhaps the most succinct summary of the entire situation. "That Jackson fellow made the classic mistake of confusing volume with authority," she said during one appointment. "He assumed that talking loudly about something made him an expert, and that anyone quieter must be less knowledgeable. Your response was perfect. You let your actions do the talking." As Sophia finished Emma Wilson's haircut and began cleaning her station for the next client, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the invisible woman with the pavillon clipboard to someone whose story had become local legend. The path hadn't been planned or anticipated, but it had led to something valuable, a community where capability was evaluated based on performance rather than assumptions. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was sustainable. Other women would never have to face the kind of systematic intimidation that had almost driven Tina Brooks away from shooting sports. Young soldiers like Tyler Anderson would understand that respect should be based on competence rather than stereotypes. Communities would be more likely to recognize and utilize the diverse talents of their members. Brad Jackson had wanted to prove his superiority once and for all. Instead, he'd created the circumstances for a demonstration that proved something far more important, that underestimating people based on appearances, professions, or gender was not just morally wrong, but practically dangerous. The quiet hairdresser had found her voice, and the echo would be heard for generations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.